All right. Hi again, everyone. My name is Laura Dean Pierre. I'm a social worker here at Advocates for Children, and I'd like to welcome you to today's training where we will be making sense of this new set of Regents cancellations, and we'll be discussing the changes to New York State graduation requirements as a result of COVID. So again, welcome, and my colleagues will be introducing themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Capri. I'm an social work intern here at Advocates for Children.
Hi, everyone. My name is Juliet. I'm an attorney at Advocates for Children.
Hi, folks. My name is Ashley Grant, and I'm also an attorney here at Advocates for Children. Laura Dean, Capri, and Juliet will be running most of this webinar, but we'll also be taking questions and answers in the Q&A box. So if you have questions, please put those in there. Please also vote on questions that you would like to see answered, and we will answer them. We'll use that to answer questions. I'll respond to some questions directly in the chat, and for others, I'll just let you know that we're going to hold off and answer them live for the whole group. So please go ahead and put your questions there, and we will be pausing throughout the webinar to answer the questions that you've put into the Q&A and to give you a chance to answer anything else. So welcome.
Okay. So as Laura Dean mentioned, we are here to talk about the cancellation of the January 2021 Regents exams due to COVID-19 and to discuss what this means for students scheduled to take these exams. Last school year, New York State canceled both the June and August Regents exams. And for more information about those cancellations, we have a webinar that we will put a link to in our chat that discusses those cancellations and exemptions. So far this year, New York State has only canceled the January Regents exams. They have not yet made a decision about whether to cancel the June or the August 2021 Regents exams. They also have not yet approved any COVID-19 graduation exemptions for students planning to take those June and August exams. So this webinar is going to really focus on the January cancellations and what changes we do know about for graduation requirements for the 2020-2021 school year. At the end, we're also going to discuss how you can join us in advocating that these COVID-19 graduation exemptions continue through the entire school year. So here is an agenda of how we are going to spend the upcoming hour. We're going to go over typical graduation requirements. We're going to discuss how those requirements have changed due to COVID-19. And then we will offer some tips and then afterwards resources in light of these cancellations. As Ashley said, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A and we will pause to respond to questions after each section. Okay, so we're going to start off today just by getting a better sense of who is with us today. So give me one moment and I will launch the polls. Give everyone a few more seconds. It looks like we've got most people's responses in, and then I will share the results. Okay, so it looks like most of us here are either professionals, mostly professionals with a few educators, a few parents. We're excited to have all of you with us. Okay, and we're going to ask you all one more question. One moment. So this question is just to get a better sense of where everyone is coming from. Okay, looks like we have most of the responses in, so I'm going to go ahead, share. I realize that our slide is a little less broken down than the poll that showed up in front of you, but it looks like most of us are coming from New York City. And there are a few of us that might be coming either from other parts of New York State or outside of New York. So again, we're excited to have you all with us. This presentation is going to focus on things that are happening mostly in New York City, but we'll also discuss New York State level changes because there is a lot of overlap, but we are excited to have you all here.
Okay, so we're going to review a little bit about the typical graduation requirements for high school in both New York State and New York City. So typically for at least New York City, the student would need 44 credits. New York State requires 22, as you can see here, but that is doubled for New York City. So it's the same amount of credits needed, but it's just doubled. So they would need 44 or 22 credits, depending on where you are in the state, and 4+1 exams. So first we'll review the credit requirements, and then we'll discuss the exam requirements and how they are impacted by COVID-19. Okay, so here are the typical courses required here. You know, there's 8 English, 8 social studies, 6 science, 6 math, 2 second language, 2 music art, 5 gym and health, and 7 other. So these credit requirements do remain the same during COVID-19, though schools may have adjusted their grading scales or policies to accommodate. There is a tip sheet that we can provide to you about high school promotion and graduation requirements if you guys would like. In order to get a high school diploma in New York State, like I said, you would need the 44 credits or 22 if you're outside of NYC, and the same courses are still required in both New York City and New York State. And those are like that has pretty much remained the same in COVID times. And all students need this amount of credits regardless of New York City or New York State, regardless of whether you're SWD, English language learner, if you're seeking a Regents diploma, a local diploma. Students seeking any advanced Regents diplomas need additional LOTE credits, 6 total, and even fewer elective credits, 3 total. So how are credit requirements changed by COVID-19? Pretty much the only main changes are as listed here. Like while students are still need to take the same total number of credits, the state has relaxed requirements to give schools more flexibility in rewarding credit. But the main 3 changes are listed here. Attendance does not count towards grades anymore. There is no lab requirement for any science regions, and there is no instructional time requirements. So most important to take away is that high school students should participate in remote learning opportunities offered by the school, but these are the main 3 changes as it regards to credits. Now I'm going to hand it off.
So we do not have any questions at this time, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section. If you do have questions about that first section, go ahead and stick them into the Q&A and we can address them at the next break.
All right, as Capri mentioned, students need to pass 4+1 exams in order to graduate in general. So generally, students have to receive a score of 65 or higher on Regents exams for that to be counted as passing. So the Regents exam requirements are typically English, math, history, a science, and a +1, which is an option that we'll talk about later. So even under the most normal of circumstances, students with disabilities and some English language learners can graduate with some Regents scores that are lower than the 65 that I just mentioned. We're not going to cover these exceptions because those exceptions are not changed as a result of COVID. And so when we're thinking about our students who are getting ready to graduate, who are English language learners or students with disabilities, and looking at the different regions that they need to pass, note that any of the exceptions that existed before still remain the same, even though there is COVID. However, at the end of this webinar, where we've included links for additional information regarding the lower Regents scores and those requirements that exist for students with disabilities and English language learners. So what changes have happened as a result of COVID? Students are exempt from the January 2021 Regents if during the first semester of 2020, so the fall semester of 2020, of the 2020-2021 school year, they pass a course that would usually end in a January 2021 Regents exam. And so that means for 11th graders taking the ELA Regents, they're likely not going to be eligible for this exemption because ELA is a 3-year, 6-semester course. So most of them probably have not finished the full sequence in order to take a January Regents. Number 2, you're exempt if you've completed a makeup program to earn a course credit. So this includes students who didn't qualify for the June or August 2020 exemptions because they they weren't able to earn course credit in time. So we're thinking of the students who received an X in as a grade at the end of last summer or last spring, and who were working towards making up those course credits during this fall semester. And lastly, students are exempt if they need this exam in order to graduate at the end of the first semester of 2020-2021. If a student got course credit prior to the 2021 school year, and they're preparing to take a Regents exam in January in order to graduate at the end of this semester, they would qualify for this exemption. An example of this is a transfer student who earned the transfer credit for a course in a prior semester and intended to take the Regents in January 2021, but for that subject, they wouldn't have to take the exam and would be able to graduate after the semester because of this exemption. All right, are there any questions?
We have no questions showing up in the Q&A, so we will move on. And again, folks, if you have questions about either of those 2 previous sections, go ahead and put them into the Q&A.
Okay, so now that Laura Dean has laid out the basic exam requirements to graduate and the COVID exemptions related to those core exam requirements, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that +1 exam requirement and how COVID-19 cancellations and exemptions impact that +1. So to begin, what are the +1 options? So essentially, this is a 5th exam or assessment that a student needs to take to fill their exam requirements in order to graduate. And this can be fulfilled in a number of ways. As you can see, the +1 can be filled with a 5th Regents exam. It can be fulfilled with an SAT 2 subject test. It can be fulfilled with a language other than English or LOTE assessment, a CTE assessment or career and technical education, or a CDOS credential, which stands for Career Development and Occupational Skills Credential. So I am going to talk about how each of these are impacted by the COVID-19 cancellations. So essentially, as you can see based on the exams that have a black X next to their names, those are the exams that are impacted by the COVID-19 Regents cancellations and other testing cancellations. So what you'll notice right away is that the SAT-2 subject test does not trigger a COVID-19 exemption. So what that means is that if a student was planning to take an SAT-2 subject test in order to fulfill the +1 exam requirement to get their diploma, they will still need to sit for that test in order to fulfill that graduation requirement. They're not exempt from it. There are also specific minimum scores that come with using an SAT-2 subject test to graduate. Something also to note, which I'm sure folks already are aware of, is that SAT test centers are closed due to COVID. So it's important to check online and see that a student is still able to take a test at a site that they're registered for. So now I'll talk about the ways that these other +1 exam requirements are impacted by the COVID-19 Regents and other assessment cancellations. So as Laura Dean reviewed, if you were intending to take a Regents exam in January or in June or August of last school year, then you may be eligible for a Regents exemption, and you can use that exemption to fulfill the +1 exam requirement in order to graduate. Important to note that New York State has not yet extended these exemptions to the June or August 2021 Regents exams. So for students intending to take those, we don't yet know whether they'll be able to use an exemption to replace the +1 requirement. For the LOTE assessment, the language other than English assessment, students who were intending to take that in June of 2020 should have already been notified whether they were exempt from that assessment, and should have been if they were intending to take that June 2020 assessment. And you can talk to the school principal to find out that information. New York State has not yet made announcements as to whether the LOTE assessment will be canceled in June 2021. So students are waived from the LOTE assessment requirement who are planning to take it last year. We don't know yet about this school year. The same exact thing goes for CTE assessments. Students who are planning to take the CTE assessments at the end of last school year and who passed a state-approved CTE program should have gotten an exemption for that assessment and could use that to meet the +1 exam requirement. Again, we don't know yet whether students will be exempt from that assessment this year. And lastly is the CDOS credential exemptions, which I'm going to go into in more depth on the next slide. Okay, so first I just want to go over what is CDOS because some folks here might not have heard of it, and it's an important way that a student can meet the +1 exam requirements to get their diploma. And there's also some more tricky exemptions that apply during COVID. So CDOS is the Career Development and Occupational Skills Credential. It's available to any student. It's meant to document entry-level work skills. As I've just mentioned, it can replace one Regents exam to meet that +1 exam requirement, but it can also be awarded alone in addition to being added to a diploma. So a student who might not be on a diploma-bound pathway could still work towards a CDOS separate from meeting diploma requirements. There are two different ways that you can get a CDOS, and I will talk about those each in turn and discuss how the exemptions affect each option. So first is option 1. And you can get a CDOS credential under option 1 by meeting the following requirements. So getting 4 credits of either CTE courses or work-based learning. And this amounts to 216 hours, but it's met by enrolling in courses that provide internship experience or job training or career and technical education. Students also have to fill out a career plan with their school and also an employability profile, which shows how they meet CDOS standards. So these are the requirements under typical times for option 1. That X next to the first box represents the fact that there are tweaks to that 4 credit requirement now during COVID-19. So during COVID-19, during this present school year, 2020-2021, work-based learning and CTE programs can be virtual. So that means that whereas before, when students were enrolling in those 4 credits to get the CDOS option 1, the CDOS credential through option 1, they were engaging in in-person experiences to do so. But now it is okay for those experiences to be virtual because of COVID-19. The CDOS credential can also be awarded under the option 1 pathway this school year, even if due to remote learning and school closures, the school cannot provide all 216 of those work-based learning hours. So essentially, you can now still get the CDOS credential under option 1 by participating in work-based learning or CTE opportunities remotely. And even if you don't quite get those 216 hours, you can still be eligible for a credential. There's also a second way that you can get a CDOS credential, which is called the option 2 pathway to get a CDOS. And under this pathway, you get a CDOS by passing an approved work readiness assessment. So below are some examples of recognized assessments that a student can pass in order to get a CDOS credential under option 2. During COVID, these requirements again are slightly changed. For this past school year, so the 2019-2020 school year, students who were intending to get a CDOS credential under the option 2 pathway were exempt from taking that assessment. Some examples of which were listed on the prior slide, and they were awarded the credential if they otherwise met CDOS learning standards. So, otherwise demonstrated their work readiness skills as determined by the school and the teachers that they were working with on those. As for this present school year, the 2020-2021 school year, we don't yet have guidance from the state as to whether students will be exempt from this option 2 pathway to get a CDOS credential, because that assessment would usually be offered in the spring. We're still waiting to learn whether there will be exemptions for that. I'm going to pause. That was a lot of information to see if there are any questions.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat, just sort of clarifying how these exemptions work. And so one of the questions that I've answered in the chat, just to clarify, is that if a student receives a COVID-19 exemption for the January exam, or if they had received one last year for the June or August exam, they are permanently exempt from that exam. So they certainly can retake the exam, but they've met the requirement in that area. So the example in the chat was if a student gets the exemption for the science exam, the question is, do they have to retake it, choose to take another science exam? And they don't. They've met the science requirement for Regents exams. They could opt to take another science exam to use as their +1, or the student could retake the exam if they wanted to at a later time when it's made available. The student could choose to retake the exam, but they have met graduation requirements for the science Regents by receiving the exemption. And that's the only question we have right now. So again, please feel free to put additional questions in the chat.
All right. All right. So we've mentioned that students are going to be receiving exemptions, but what will it look like when we think about it on a student's transcript? So each of the exams that a student receives a COVID-19 exemption for should be listed on their transcript, and it will be listed as either a WA next to the name of the exam or an E next to the name of the exam instead of a typical score. The score will not be considered when making the honors or advanced Regents diploma determinations, and that's because the score is considered a passing score, but no numerical score is recorded towards that. Something else to note is that these exemptions can count later towards an HSE diploma for a student who is considering seeking the HSE diploma. So as I mentioned, the score will not impact a student's hopes of receiving honors or advanced Regents diploma determinations. For honors students working towards the honors designation won't be harmed by these COVID-19 exemptions because the exempted exams won't be part of the calculations. The exemptions are excluded, but if a student has averaged 90 or above on all exams taken applicable for their diploma type, they're going to attain honors and on their diploma. The COVID-19 exemptions just show that they have that they will not need to take that exam again, but it won't, because there's no physical numerical score attached to the exams, that there's no number to add as part of that averaging. In terms of the task or the working towards a high school equivalency diploma, in general, students who leave high school without a diploma can combine passing Regents exam scores with passing task subtests to earn the high school equivalency diploma, often called the HSE, or what was previously called the GED. If a student's transcripts show that they were exempt from one or more Regents exams due to COVID, they will also be exempt from that section or that subtest of the task exam. And yes. So let's talk a little bit more about the high school equivalency process. So while the task test centers are closed because of COVID, students can still earn a high school equivalency diploma without passing any task subtest or any other exams if they are enrolled in an approved program and in 3 or more subtests have either a passing Regents exam score or a COVID-19 exemption or a passing task or GED subtest scores, or they are able to take a teacher approved assessment for the remaining subtests. So many of the task centers are currently closed as a result because of COVID. And even beyond this period, if a student's transcript shows that they were exempt for one or more Regents because of COVID, they will still be exempt from that subtest of the task. Students are able to enroll for free in approved high school equivalency programs throughout New York City by emailing the referral centers, and I think we'll be putting that email in the chat. And so for this reason, because of the ability to use the exemptions and because of how students are able to combine passing Regents exams and the exemption score and the exemptions and passing subtests, it's really important that the high school transcript lists all of the Regents exams that a student was exempt for during COVID-19, if they were at all considering going the high school equivalency diploma path, or in general, if they should have been exempt for that exam. All right. So here are a few tips about how to navigate this process. After this presentation, all of those who participated and attended will receive this PowerPoint. And within this PowerPoint, there are several links embedded. And so you'll be able to click the link. So you're able to track your progress towards graduation using this worksheet. I'm unable to show you the worksheet at the moment, but when you receive the PowerPoint, if you click the link that's attached to this slide, you will be able to see this worksheet to navigate the progress of a student towards graduation. And it's really important that the students are passing their classes. And if remote learning, which is very difficult for a lot of students for a variety of reasons. If it's hard for the student that you're working with or for your child, or if it's not working for them, it's very important to ask for help and make that known so that they can receive additional supports in order to pass the class. And something else to note is that students are able to stay in school until the June after they turn 21, or until they earn a diploma, whichever one of those things comes first. So there's time. And if you want any more tips or any live updates regarding COVID-19 in education, there's also a link on this slide that you'll be able to click once you've received this PowerPoint. For students with disabilities, all students with IEPs in New York City should have a remote learning plan. And here again, there's a link to provide a little bit more information about what remote learning plans are. So if you're working with or you have a child with a disability, they should have received a remote learning plan to support their IEPs and to support them as they navigate remote learning. And you, as a parent or as an advocate for a student or as somebody working directly with students, it's really important that during IEP meetings, you're asking about the progress towards graduation, in that you are able to really have a good understanding of where a student is, not only in terms of what progress they're making on their IEP, but also what progress they are making towards their graduation. And I spoke about this previously, that there are certain exceptions for students with disabilities to receive a lower than 65 score in order to receive a Regents, to be considered as a past Regents. Something to note that is that although the COVID-19 exemptions are considered passing scores, students with disabilities are not able to use them as a high score for one of the compensatory safety nets that exists to offset a lower score. And for more information on what the compensatory safety nets are, there is a link in this slide, and you'll be able to click that once you receive this presentation when we're done. And there is also a link for a little bit more information and tips at the bottom of the slide. So please, when you receive this presentation, go through the links. There's a lot of really important information in the links. Thanks. Are there any questions?
So we do have a question. Does the student have to be scheduled in stars for the exam in order to be exempt? So the requirements from the state are on slide 11. Juliet, could you put slide 11 back up for us? So the state has said that to be exempt, students need to pass a course that would usually end with the January Regents exam, complete a makeup program to earn course credit this semester, or students need to be relying on this exam to graduate at the end of this current school year. So there's nothing in the state that requires this to be in stars, but we're not sure whether this needs to be entered into stars for students to get the exemption here in the DOE. So if you believe that you or your child is eligible for this exemption, we encourage you to speak to your school just to make sure that everything is recorded properly. And that is the only question that we're answering live. There are some other Q&A in the chat.
All right. So now Ash is going to share a bit of information about the graduation requirements generally and the links that are on these slides.
So We are going to share links to these slides, and what you're going to see, we're going to share these slides and these links are in here. So what these links include is a guide on basic graduation requirements here in New York City, a guide on graduation options for students with disabilities that lays out a little bit more about the various safety nets that Juliet and Lauradine have spoken about. Then on the next page, there's going to be 3 additional links. The first one is to our summary of COVID-19 graduation changes. This will give you information about Regents exemptions from last year and for January. And then there's also a couple of links to the New York State Education Department's graduation guidance and graduation frequently asked questions. We also just wanted to share with you that, as we said, we now have information about the January Regents exams, but we don't have information yet from New York State regarding the June or the August Regents exams, which means that students planning to take these exams are still waiting to hear whether the assessments will be administered and whether Regents exam exemptions will be extended into next year. So the Coalition for Multiple Pathways to Graduation or to a Diploma has created a petition asking New York State Education Department and the Board of Regents to suspend New York State regulations requiring students to pass Regents exams during the 2021 school year. So if you're a parent, a student, or an educator and you're interested in signing this petition, we're going to put the chat into the link into the chat so that you can join in that request if that's something that you're interested in doing. The New York State Education Department, before the pandemic, had also started a graduation measures initiative to re-examine graduation requirements in New York State. So that initiative has been suspended, but you can still tell the New York State Education Department what you think should be required to graduate. So when you receive these slides, there's a link to get updates from New York State regarding the Graduation Measures Initiative. And there's also a survey on the New York State Education Department website where you can click to tell New York State what you think should be required to graduate. In addition, Advocates for Children coordinates the Coalition for Multiple Pathways to a Diploma. And you can certainly join us in urging New York State Education Department to rethink Regents exams. We think that students, the coalition believes that students need to be able to have multiple pathways to graduation that don't rely on high stakes exams. And if you'd like to join us in the advocacy, you can email me at this address here. You can follow us on Facebook, and we'll also share a link in the chat for more information about this coalition. Also in the chat is, or I'm sorry, not in the chat, but in the slides that you'll receive afterward is some information about some general COVID-19 resources. The first link will provide you updates from Advocates for Children on changes due to COVID-19. We're also including some general resources from Help Now NYC and some mental health and emotional support resources from Thrive NYC. And those links will all be in the PowerPoint that you will receive immediately following this presentation.
All right, so we've come to the end of our presentation. So thank you all for joining us. But before you leave, there is a quick 4-question survey that we're just asking you to fill out just to help us better do these trainings in the future and to help us know if this information was useful for you. So please take a moment to fill out this quick survey. For just a few questions.
And we have come to the end of our formal presentation, but if you have additional questions, you can still continue to put those in the chat and we are happy to answer them.
Okay. Thank you all so much for joining us, and please keep an eye out for the email where you'll be receiving the presentation slides. Thank you.
Thanks so much, folks. We're not seeing any other questions in chat, but we'll hang out for a few more minutes. So the presentation's over and feel free to go, but we're going to hang out just for a few more minutes in case you have any additional questions for us. Thank you. Maureen, I'm seeing your question in the Q&A, and I'm just going to read it and get back to you. So the question is, if you have students who, based on the cancellation of the Regents last June, were exempted from 4 or 5 exams, those students the exemption is worth the equivalent of a 65. So if the student were to receive 5 exemptions in all areas 4+1, they would be able to receive a Regents diploma. If a student were working toward a local diploma because they are a student with a disability, for example, and some of their Regents scores are lower than a 65, the exempted score would still sort of count as a 65, and they can use that toward either a local diploma or a Regents diploma. Maureen, if that doesn't answer your question, please go ahead and let us know again, and I can or put it back in, and I'm happy to say more about that. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions. We've got some contact information at the end of the presentation, and please feel free to reach out to us if you think of anything later. Nemo, I'm seeing your question, and so we'll respond to that before we get off. The question is, would a homeschool or private school student still be eligible for services after turning 21? Students are eligible to remain in school until the end of the school year in which they turn 21. So if a student turns 21 during the school year, so before the end of June, they have the right to either remain in school or return to a public school during that time. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to end the webinar now. And of course, you're very welcome to email us at info@advocatesforchildren.org if you have any follow-up questions. Thanks so much.
Oh, I have FAQs in all 5 areas.
Guys, there's still one more question. So if you hang on, I'm going to answer this question in the chat before we go.
Maureen's question?
Yeah, Maureen's question is, so she's not sure that answered my question. My students all have IEPs, and some students received exemptions in all 5 areas, and some received exemptions in 4 Regents test areas. Would they receive a Regents diploma? So if they received the exemptions in all 5 required areas, 4+1, yes, they would be eligible for a Regents diploma. If they received exemptions in 4 test areas and they're a student with disability, it would depend on what that remaining score was. If they were able to score a 65, then on that 5th exam or get an exemption to the 5th exam, then yes, they would get a Regents diploma. If they were using a safety net score, something between 40, I guess it would have to be in the high safety net, so between 45 and 55. I'm sorry, between 55 and 64 on that fifth exam, the student would receive a local diploma because they'd be relying on the safety net for that fifth exam. Essentially, the exemptions count as a 65. So if they have 5 exemptions, then it counts as a local. I'm sorry, as a Regents diploma. If they have 4 that count as 65s and need to use the safety net for that fifth exam, they would be receiving a local diploma.
And to answer Nemo's question, after a student turns 21 and they're no longer a student of the school system, they no longer are able to receive school services. So they wouldn't continue receiving special education services through the school system after they've turned 21.
Nemo,
And
does that answer your question? Students, once a student graduates or the end of the school year comes in which they turn 21, then there's no more right to special education services absent a hearing order.
and Maureen, yes, 4 + 1 plus a CDOS equals a Regents diploma. All right. Thank you all so much for participating with us. And please feel free to email info@advocatesforchildren if you have any additional questions. And thank you. All right.
Thanks.